The 85th plenary meeting of the General Assembly is called to order. I now give the floor to the representative of Nauru, who will introduce draft resolution A/63/L8/Revision 1.
We stand here at a historic moment, a confluence of firsts. This is both the first resolution for the PCIDS and the first General Assembly resolution on the security implications of climate change. Mr. President, to understand the backdrop of the draft resolution, I wish to briefly talk first about the Pacific, a region which has been relentlessly threatened by the adverse impacts of climate change. The islands of the PCIDS range from Nauru, the world's smallest island nation, covering only 21 square kilometers, to Papua New Guinea, the second largest island in the world, covering about 309,000 square kilometers, to Tuvalu, made up of 4 reef islands and 5 true atolls, is only 26 square kilometers. Tuvalu is the 4th smallest country in the world, and only 1/10 of the size of Washington, D.C. There can be no doubt that most of our islands are very tiny indeed. The vulnerability of our islands results from the small size of our homelands, coupled with the volume of the great ocean that surrounds us. Scientists have predicted that this ocean will continue to rise at an increasing rate. The Pacific Ocean, in which we have lived for centuries, will eventually leave little of our homelands behind if urgent action is not taken. Mr. President, may I reiterate the sentiments of the UN Secretary General at the meeting of the Pacific Forum leaders in Niue, wherein he stated, and I quote, "Climate change is not science fiction. It is real and present," end of quote. While it's anticipated that most nations will ultimately suffer from the adverse effects of climate change, small island states, including PCIDS, are already grappling with dire and immediate impacts today. The impacts on our nations include the inundation of coastal areas, where the majority of our people live, the submergence of islands, loss of freshwater supplies, saltwater intrusion, flooding, droughts, damaged crops, and failure of agriculture, diminution of biodiversity, destruction of critical infrastructure, and a substantial increase in the incidence of serious diseases. In many cases, these impacts will ultimately render Pacific Island nations uninhabitable, destroying our unique and ancient cultures. As the rest of the world continues to debate the security implications of climate change, for our peoples, the problem is astoundingly real. And while some countries may have resources to mitigate and transfer their people to safety during times of natural disaster, we do not have this luxury. Our citizens literally have nowhere to run. Communities on drowning islands throughout the Pacific are faced with a looming homelessness crisis due to rising sea levels. For some, the only viable option is to migrate. While many have already relocated, more are expected to follow as more of our islands eventually submerge. Imagine a country submerging as a whole. Consider its territorial sovereignty, its population, and its government. These are fundamental considerations which, under international law, define one's status as a state. Some of our Pacific countries are in danger of losing their populations and their land as a whole. They will cease to be states. Never before has a UN member state disappeared. Now we are faced with the threat of losing many due to the adverse effects of climate change. Consider a country which has been deeply affected by severe droughts, which can no longer sustain itself because its hydropower is non-operational and its drinking water is non-existent. A country who can no longer produce crops to feed its people. Consider a country that has been washed too often by floods and other natural disasters, which have taken away every bit of hope that they have of their future. It is important to realize that there will come a time when no amount of aid will be able to insulate countries from the impacts of climate change.